So you there you go. So just a reminder, you're now all being recorded for posterity. If you're not happy with that, please turn off cameras and microphones and watch your language. So welcome to the Fountain Pens UK second workshop on calligraphy with Sunil Malkani. Sunil, I'm going to let you do your own introductions. I think you're probably able to introduce yourself far better than I can tonight for various reasons. The theme of tonight's workshop is modern calligraphy lettering, I believe. We should also say that this evening's event is being sponsored by Den's Pens, and I believe he's also donating a pen to a participant selected at random, which is very exciting. So Den's one of the UK kind of artisan pen makers out there. He is a fantastic guy. He's a very, very clever craftsman. He's made custom pens with you, I think, Sunil, at the Good Blue as well. They're lovely, lovely pens. I really recommend that you go and have a look at Den's website and buy some of his pens. That's all I'm going to say. I'm going to hand over to you, Sunil. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jim, and thanks to all of the folks on the admin team at FPUK for organizing the event. I'm always surprised that people want to see me come back, but I'm quite pleasantly surprised. So thank you for taking the time to join in as well, and to those folks who either joined or watched the recording of the first part. This whole thing came about sort of towards winter time last year when FPUK was putting together a sort of package of maybe 10 or 15 events over Christmas. I think it was called the 12 Days of Christmas, but it ended up being more than 12. And I did a calligraphy workshop, an online workshop. And I think what happened there was we kind of did half of what the agenda was, and we kind of stopped because we ran out of time. And so this is really the second half, picking up from where we left off. And I think if you dig through FPUK on Facebook, you should find the link. Steph's posted it, and a couple of folks have posted it to a video on YouTube that has that first half, if you're interested and haven't seen it. But essentially, where we got to the last time was we did some background on calligraphy, what it is, how we do calligraphy, and so on, and just learned some of the basic strokes and how the strokes translate into producing letters, letters of the alphabet, essentially. And what I wanted to do today was just pick up from there. It's my messy desk. But just pick up from there and do a super quick recap, talk a little bit about faux calligraphy, because I think, lots of people maybe not using a dip pen, a calligraphy dip pen or a flex nib fountain pen or whatever, and might still want to follow along. And just kind of giving a little bit of an outline of how you can do that. It's not as complicated as it sounds. And then just focusing the next 40 minutes or so on actually just writing. So I've got a few 2 or 3 word quotes. How do you put things together, 2 or 3 words together and make it look interesting? Things that you might want to write, thank you notes or a happy birthday or something like that. And then, folks who are following along live, if there's any suggestions in terms of things that you want to write. And I was hoping that if you guys have your favorite calligraphy tools or fountain pen, you can follow along as we go. And yeah, I'm happy to take suggestions from you, and we can work through writing some of those suggestions together, and then just wrap up with a quick Q&A at the end. Hopefully everyone can see my camera. I did check with Steph that it's fairly sort of in focus and everything. And I do have a nice zoomed version as well this time, so we can get really in, hopefully in detail and see what it is that I'm doing exactly. Right. So just a quick recap of what we spoke about in part 1. And basically, the thing that we were discussing was how calligraphy is different from cursive handwriting, and I think that's kind of one of the key things that I wanted to just recap. And when you normally write cursive, something like this, the idea is that your pen works through and blends each stroke or each letter into the next, right? And with calligraphy, it's much more about it's much more like drawing really than writing. And you even though the finished product might look like it's all joined up, as you can see, after each stroke, I'm actually lifting the pen up off the paper. And sometimes you can even come back later and join up strokes, something like that. Um, so that's just one thing that I wanted to highlight, just keeping in mind that, when you see a finished product like this, it looks like it's, very similar to cursive and you've just kind of written the whole thing out in one go. But usually that's not the case. And more than that, as we discussed in kind of part one of this, I suppose, oftentimes it's not just even a letter, but it's strokes that make up a letter. So, say for example, a P, you might have an entrance stroke like that, and then you'll have the downstroke for the stem of the P, um, and then you'll have this kind of a circle and an exit stroke like that, and that's kind of the P formed from 3 or 4 different strokes, and then you might blend that. So let's say writing the word play, that exit stroke of the P might go into the L, and then you have a downstroke here at the L. I intentionally just lifted my pen up, and then you have the exit stroke of the L like that, and that goes into the A, and similarly the Y. So just a reminder that, it's more like drawing. You're making multiple strokes to form each letter, um, and then the letters are blending in together. Hopefully that makes sense. And then the other thing that we covered off, sorry, was somebody jumping in with the question? No? Okay. And then the other thing that we covered off was, which is worth going over really quickly, is just all the letters of the alphabet, just so you can see loosely. Of course, there's different scripts and different styles that everybody has, and you'll develop on your own as well as you start practicing. But just to give you a quick flavor of sort of the more common or generic ways of writing each letter, I'll just go over them really quick. And maybe it's worth me just zooming in for this one so you can see each letter more clearly. Okay, so I'll just do the lowercase. So entrance stroke and this kind of C shape, and that's an A. And then the other thing I should say, sorry, I should just super basic, just in case you're not clear what is it exactly that I'm doing to get the line variation. In general, the rule of thumb is any upstrokes, so any strokes that you're making where you're pushing away from your body or moving upwards, you'd put no pressure on the nib at all. And you get a fairly fine line, in traditional calligraphy, even finer than this, if we called a hairline. This is kind of somewhere in between an extra fine and a fine, really. And then on the downstrokes, so any stroke that you're pulling towards your body or moving downwards along the paper, you'd put some pressure on the nib to get the nib to flex, and so you'd get some line variation or you'd get a wider line, so something like this. And that's how the classic thing that you see when people show off flex pens or dip nibs or whatever. You get these classic swirls or these figure-of-8 patterns, and that's essentially how they're made. So all the bits where the pen is moving away from your body, even if it's not, vertically upwards, but if it's a curved line like this, you're putting no pressure on at all. And then as you press down on the downstroke. So these downstrokes here. Sorry, I should have said that at the start. Um, anyway, A, B, C, entrance stroke for the D, E, F, H, I, A. Hello, Mr. Pen. A. L. M. N. O. B. Q. R. S. Y. And Z. And I mean, there's lots of different variations. Like, some people might write Z like this, just for example, and so on. But I think these are just the kind of the the absolute basics, and we covered this off in a fair amount of detail the last time. And then where it gets really interesting is as you put the letters together to make words, and you can use really interesting different styles. I'm just going to draw out these lines just so you can see loosely the lines that I'm working with. So, you could write, let's say, the word word. This pen is really misbehaving today. Let's try that again. Maybe go back here. Always the case, huh? Not to worry, I have another pen at hand. So just following what we did and linking these letters together, and that's fairly straightforward and standard, and it isn't really, it's all right, but it's not very exciting. And what you can do is you can start to play around with some of those letter forms and how you link those letters up together to make it look more interesting. So one of the typical things that folks do with modern calligraphy is bounce. So what that means is you change the height of each letter to make the word visually look more interesting. So you might do something like this. And then you can start to play around a little bit with the letter forms as well. So, I've looped the D here, for example, just moving up and down in terms of the height or the size. Um, and then, of course, more towards the traditional um, calligraphy styles, like, for example, copper plate and so on. Um, so something like that. Hopefully that makes sense. And so there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can do that. And then once you have a couple of words that you're writing together, then you can kind of almost compose the way that that's laid out or set up. So let's say we want to write the phrase, I guess, thank you. Oh, every single pen seems to be misbehaving today. So, just the choice of the choice of where you put the words, you don't necessarily have to start the second word, kind of aligned with the first word, how you line up the words horizontally as well as how you line up the words vertically here. Um, and there's a lot like that that you can play with, even little embellishments, like you can go in and loop the K afterwards like that. So it looks a little bit more visually interesting. So that's kind of where we roughly where we left off last time. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about core calligraphy. So what happens if you don't have a dip pen, a flex nib dip pen, or a flex nib fountain pen, or something like that? Um, and what you can do is um, you can use just a regular cap all these guys. You can use just a regular fountain pen. Um, so just absolutely bog standard, without a flex nib or anything like that. And you can just write exactly as you would. So that's just a cursive word. And then wherever the downstrokes are, you just go over them to make them a bit thicker. So it's called co-calligraphy for obvious reasons. But it's quite interesting when you look at the when you look at the results. Let's try that with another word. Let's write calligraphy. Oh, I shouldn't have done it that way. Hang on. It's gonna use this nib reversed, so it's quite fine to start with, so that you can get a little bit more variation when you fill it out. So obviously I've just made these pencil lines so you guys can see the X height or the height of my lowercase letters. So it's easy to follow along. But I mean, usually what I would do is I just have like a ruled paper underneath, and then I use quite lightweight paper. And I'm not sure if this comes across on camera, but I can actually see the ruling fairly well um, through the paper. So I don't need to rule this sheet of paper that I'm writing on at all, with pencil marks or anything like that. And loads of other people also use light boxes. So essentially, that's just a flat kind of looks like an old-fashioned clipboard, but has LED lights inside. So you just set your ruled sheet of paper on that. You set your ruled sheet of paper on that. So I'll show you what mine looks like. For example, you can see uh, it kind of it kind of looks like this. It's not plugged in at the moment, but it just plugs into USB. And then you put your ruled sheet of paper on there, and then you put your the sheet that you're working on top of that, and then you can, backlight it essentially, and that allows you to have some ruling without having to make these pencil marks. And so just coming back to the folk calligraphy. Um, so now all the bits where we've got downstrokes, we're just going to go over them. And I've gone back to using my nib regularly, so you get a bit of a wider line. Um, and we're just going to go over each of those downstrokes. Just like that. Forgot to dot the I. And it's a bit time consuming, as you can see. But particularly if you're working on, a couple of words, like you're doing, say, happy birthday for a card for somebody or something like that, or just a 2 or 3 word quote that you might be doing for your journal, or a title um, on a page or something. It's not that much effort, really. And, that looks fairly, could have done a better job on the P, but that looks fairly good. And then, of course, you could do a bunch of embellishments if you wanted. So, you could loop one of the L's, for example. I always like to do something like that. Um, Maybe I could have looped the H as well. Maybe not both on the same word. It might look a bit too embellished. I don't know. But yeah, even little things like, particularly when you've got a descender, a letter like a Y or a G at the end of a word, instead of taking the sort of the exit stroke up this way, you could also take the exit stroke downwards like this, something like that. And obviously on all of the downstrokes, you'd have some swells like that. So it could look quite interesting. So it's actually really not so much about the tools. You don't need to have a specific kind of pen or a specific kind of dip nib or anything like that. I mean, you're quite okay just using pretty much your favorite fountain pen and putting that little bit of extra effort in to shade in all of the downstrokes, and you get a fairly good result. Right. What I did do, just in terms of next, so I wanted to say, I mean, please, obviously, if you guys are watching live, feel free, or watching the video later, feel free to follow along. And you can just use whatever your favorite fountain pen is, or if you have a flex nib pen, that's great. Um, Let me just go back and see if some of these guys are happy to. Right. So what I did do earlier was I kind of put together a few common, random kind of two-word quotes, or common things like "thank you" or "happy anniversary," that you might want to write on a day-to-day basis, on cards or for something like that. And I thought we could do some of these together. And if you want to pop anything into chat that you think that you'd like for us to write together, something that's typically 2 or 3 words. It could be a bit longer if you like. And we can try and work through some of that. Um, so I thought I'll start with thank you, because I think that's something that you can imagine needing to write or wanting to write fairly often. Let me just go back to a bit more zoom view. There we go. So starting super simple, just a regular. This guy is really not wanting to play nice today. Not sure what's going on. Give me a sec. Let's try that again. Always the case, isn't it? All right, let's try that again. So just keeping it super simple, but little things like, a very broad, long, or expressive cross stroke on the capital T that just adds a little bit of interest and character and makes people look and notice. And similarly with the exit stroke on the K, just kind of really exaggerating that a little bit, giving it a nice natural curve. So the whole thing kind of hangs together quite nicely. And then kind of mirroring that curve or that shape to add a little bit of symmetry, just trying to see how you can bring the two words together. And I've intentionally gone really close in terms of the line spacing here, because I know that there's no ascenders, there's no letters with, like an H or an L in the second word. So I can go quite tight with the line spacing, and that makes the whole thing sort of hang together as a unit, quite maybe more nicely. So something like that. And I mean, if you think about it, it's actually fairly straightforward. We've just made those letters, just use the same letter forms, but We've done a few interesting things, exaggerating some of the strokes, maybe even the exit stroke on the U. You might put a little bit of a line like that across the bottom, and it just adds a little bit of interest or character. The other thing that a different style, maybe you could do a little bit of an embellishment on the T itself. So that's a more formal style T, but you've got this bit of a flourish or an embellishment there. Loop the K. I'm not a big fan of looping Ks because I find these two loops look a bit funny, but you know, and then since we've done a little bit of this flourish or embellishment on the T, we might want to mirror that with the U, with the Y in the U. So maybe slightly more formal or more traditional, maybe less modern calligraphy, but still certainly not in any one of the formal styles necessarily. But lots of loops and flourishes happening essentially, which could be interesting, could be an interesting style too. Um, and then we could do something. We were talking about the bounce earlier, where we kind of vary the height of the letters. Here we've got very uniform height letters, as you can see. But you can vary the height of the letters as well. So we could do something that makes it look a little bit more playful. And when I do something like this, I was just thinking, I won't start with a capital T. It's gonna be a bit fun, a bit more playful. So a big exaggerated entrance stroke. Maybe a little exclamation mark for this one, something like that. So very, very different in style. But if you think about all of the letters and the way that you're working through each of the letters, you'll see that there's sort of a common approach or a common language. Um, One of the things that works really nicely for me, when I'm thinking about stuff like this, is I usually just pick up a pencil and I'll just doodle a few bits. So I might just draw a block, and I kind of know the space that I want to work in, and then I'll think about how I want to divide that space up. Obviously thank has 5 letters and then U has 3. So maybe I'll think, okay, is this going to be my thank and is this going to be my U, or maybe I'll just have my U in this box here. Or I might think sometimes about not necessarily having both the lines the same height. You might write you might do something like this, where you have a really small thank like this, and then a really big U like this. So then you think about, okay, how are you going to fill this space? So you might want to have your letters quite spaced out a little bit when you write the thank. So I might think about something like this. It's sort of similar to what we did there. And then do I want to just, I kind of feel like, because it's going to be so large here, I can kind of feels like I'll do all these in uppercase. So I might do a U like this. And then I might think about this and I might think, can I doodle a bit more? Can I do something more interesting? Can I do something more interesting with these letters in the U? I kind of immediately see I want to overlap them a little bit maybe. So, I might think about something like this. I don't know. So just in terms of a process, it sometimes helps if you have something specific that you want to do, just to kind of think about bounding it in a frame or a box, and then you can kind of almost compose how you want the letters to fit into that space. Um, and I find that really helps. I mean, things like this, of course, I've written thank you so many times on cards or letters or whatever, that I kind of have some fixed ideas in mind already. But if you think about a new phrase, something that you're starting for the first time or you haven't done before, then you might want to play with this bounding box a little bit and just try and look through it. So I was doing that a little bit earlier today. I don't know where I put those sheets of paper that I was noodling with when I was doing some of these, and just thinking about some things like how I've got the aim here with high. Obviously the bounce is bounce. And then when I was playing with this, I wanted the word big to be big. So I started out by writing that word and then thinking, where do I fit the dream? Can I fit the dream around it? So, maybe we can work on this one just to play about. Um, and just feel free to pop any questions or thoughts or comments into the chat if you like. And also if there's any specific phrases, words, or quotes that you want us to work together on during the workshop, we can certainly do that. So just thinking about the dream big, the way I was thinking about it was I was thinking about writing the big first, like really big because it's big. It's the word big. And then how do I fit dream, So it could be just like this. It could be something like that, or it could be something more, kind of more whimsical. So, kind of more following a curve shape like this. So I could do, and then you kind of see this shape. I see the top of the B. I see this right here, and that fits so nicely. I'm like, okay, something like that could be really quite interesting. So I might now kind of just start sketching out, pick up the pen and start sketching out um, some ideas for this. So maybe I'll start by writing the word big, and it's quite playful. So I don't want a very formal, I don't want to write my B in a very formal style like this with a whole bunch of, that's maybe not the kind of style that I'll go for. I'll go for something much more loose and let's just zoom in here. Much more loose and casual. Um, so let's think about a B that we can do. I kind of when it comes to loose and casual, I kind of like to show this upstroke rather than picking my pen up and going here to start the B. I like to show this upstroke here and just go like that. And it just looks super loose and relaxed. But thinking about this shape, and suddenly we've lost that shape. And thinking the dream is going to come here, something like this, right? So maybe we want to have a little bit more exaggerated B. So I say, okay, fair enough. Let's go back and try that B again. Maybe something like that might look a little bit nicer. And then what am I going to do with the G? Maybe make it a bit bigger. And then I can go back. I just go back with my pencil maybe and think about what that shape was that I wanted. Something like this. And then what's that dream going to look like? Is that going to be all lowercase? Is it going to be all caps? What am I going to do? So I mean, the all caps, I think would look really, it wouldn't necessarily fit in with this style. I think a lowercase, so I'll do, again, quite loose and flowy. I'm not worrying too much. Maybe it needs to be a bit smaller, like, I don't know. So let's just go back to that box. So if you think what's happening here in this box is the big is kind of looking like this, right? Because you've got a capital B. Oh, sorry. You've got a capital B, and you've got this bit here, and this is kind of the space that you've got to fit the word dream into. So I might kind of just loosely draw that box, and let's try the B. Now that we have this curve right here, we know what we're going for. Pen is really misbehaving today. So we kind of know what we're going for with the B there. Maybe I've written too big here. Let's try that again. Yeah, maybe even that very exaggerated exit stroke doesn't necessarily fit. I kind of quite like how this looks. And then just going back to think about how that dream is going to fit. I kind of almost feel like I wouldn't want to. Um, I just want to write that monoline, with the standard line thickness on the dream. So I'm just going reverse with my nib here so that it's easy to keep that monoline. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, it's not too bad. Something like that. So just starting to think a little bit about the composition, playing around with some of the options like this, thinking about all the tools that you have at your disposal in terms of how you want to frame and work with stuff. So some of the things that we've done here, we've chosen not to use any flex writing at all and just write monoline for the dream, which is fine. We've gone with a curve for the baseline, and kind of the letters are kind of following the shape of that curve rather than writing in a straight line like this. And similarly with the big, we've kind of exaggerated the fact that the word is big by writing it much larger than the word dream. And we've gone with a very, very loose style for the letters. Um, I mean, it's quite interesting. You could go a very different way, and I'm just thinking out loud now. I mean, you could still go loose, but you can maybe go all caps, and that feels more blocky, and it's more like it's a thing. You're dreaming big. And now you can easily see this has kind of become a straight line because of the serif on the eye that I've massively exaggerated here. And again, I'm just going in with the reverse on the nib, and I'm not gonna do any flex here. And this time, since this is in all caps, I'm just gonna do the dream in all caps as well. A nice straight line, small letters, as in small height. Something like that. And very, very different in style. Could be interesting. Maybe it's a bit too straight. I don't know. But it's certainly worth thinking about. So yeah, worth stopping really quick. There's a couple of questions in the chat. Kay says, I missed the beginning. Sorry, what nib are you using there? It's just a flex nib, a standard fountain pen with a flex nib. But you can use just a regular monoline nib as well. I was saying, Kay, earlier that there's something called faux calligraphy. So just working with this with a standard pen, with a standard fountain pen, um, and you might write, let's say, I left this guy uncapped, didn't I? That wasn't very clever. So you might just write, um, standard monoline like this, and then wherever you have the downstrokes, you can just go over those, um, make them a bit more pronounced, and you get a very sort of pointed pen calligraphy style. So it doesn't really, I mean, it certainly helps if you have a traditional dip pen nib, or something similar, but it doesn't matter massively. And yet you can use your favorite standard fountain pen as well, and that's totally all right. Remember to cap it this time, clever. Um, yeah, and then we had another question from Nicola, who says, I always struggle with the R. What's the best way to do it? Um, well, it is a tricky letter. I don't know what, I'm not sure what best necessarily is, but we can do a couple. So, I mean, the way that I usually do R is like this. Well, lowercase, I guess, lowercase r. Um, so just breaking that down and going really slow. There's an upstroke that goes all the way to the top of the X height. And R is one of those letters that this little loop on the R, if you're writing it this way, usually tends to be just a little bit above the X height. I think I might have exaggerated a bit there, but kind of maybe just straddling, so I'll just write an A as standard. So you kind of have a sense of, so let's say we're writing the word R, A-R-E. So the exit stroke of the A would go into the upstroke on the R, and you kind of want that loopy bit of the R to be just above or straddling that X height, like that. I haven't even drawn the loop really. And then you have this downstroke, which is this flex swell. And then it goes into the exit stroke that you'd form your next letter. Let's say we're writing E here to get the word R. So again, you just have an entrance stroke, a little bit of a loop. I kind of tend to lift my pen just before I'm doing that loop, and then the exit stroke. And this is a bit ugly, frankly, but can I do it like this? And even that loop is just kind of a hint of a loop. It isn't really necessarily a loop, the way I write it at least. And then sometimes, because I don't like this very flat, almost like tabletop-y thing, which looks very abrupt to me. And so I kind of sometimes go back and I just connect this up a little bit to make this to, to give you a bit of a sloping shoulder here, if that makes sense. So this kind of looks like this, something like this, and you have this slope rather than an R like this, which seems very abrupt to me. Just it's almost a hint of that shoulder, but it's kind of sloping quite nicely downwards. And then the other way to write R, of course, is kind of how you would necessarily potentially learn in primary school. You just go with the downstroke here like this, and then you have the R like that. So it's literally just a downstroke that's pretty much straight, and then you just go back up and just a bit of a flick. And again, if you want to connect that, let's write the same word again. And then with the E, you just let that connect quite naturally. So I'm literally lifting my pen up off the paper, and I'm going to go and draw that E here. I don't know, maybe it's not that great, huh? It kind of looks like AVE. Think about that one. But it is a tricky letter in general, definitely. Let's get on the sheet of paper. Okay. So that was Dream Big that we did. And then the other one that I thought is worth doing, because it's one of those that you might end up writing quite often, would be Happy Birthday or Happy Anniversary or something like that. We could do Happy Birthday. Doesn't really matter. Um, so a whole bunch of different ways to do this. Just starting with really basic. Um, so lots of exaggerated cross strokes here. Maybe I didn't do a great job in terms of the line spacing. So you can see this, the descender on the Y and the loop on the Y bumping effectively into the cross stroke on the T. That doesn't look that great. So maybe would have been better to have a little bit more spacing potentially. But super simple, and little things you might notice, like when I'm writing the H, instead of having lines that are absolutely instead of having lines that are absolutely straight like this, I'm actually very subtly and slightly curving this line like this. And that just gives it makes the word or the letters feel just a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more interesting. You've got this H like this rather than an H that's absolutely straight like that. So just these little things, and you'll see when I'm doing that, I'm then holding that style across the word. So even the descenders on the P's, you see them not going down as straight lines like this, or even at that slight oblique, but they're kind of curving a little bit like this, you might notice. And then try and mimic those in all of the ascenders and descenders, and kind of even in the Y, in the shape of the Y, where it's not a straight line like this, but it's a bit of a compound curve almost like that. And it's these little things that kind of just add a bit of, it just makes it feel a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more alive on the page. Let's try a little looser, more bouncy style. So again, for a style like this, usually me personally, my preference is just to go lowercase. So I'll go lowercase like this. Lots of kerning, lots of space between the letters. And the my thinking or reasoning here is that the word happy is obviously much shorter than the word birthday. So I've got lots of space to play with as I work into the word birthday here. So I'll go a little bit tighter with the birthday. And again, just kind of, long, exaggerated entrance and exit strokes, and kind of mimicking that or copying that with the long, exaggerated cross stroke on the T. And you have something that's, much more loose, much more fun. It might be something that you do for a young child's birthday card or something like that. Um, and then, of course, you can just go for, what we've done with the Dream Big as well, where you can just change the height of the different of the two lines. And, you might start out by writing just birthday. And then you might just write your happy smaller, maybe no flex. Could be something like that. Maybe it didn't need that massive cross stroke. It would have just been a little cross stroke there. And just, playing around with the form on on the H. And then you could be, you could go like a lot. These are a bit rounder and flowy, and you could go a little bit more angular, for example, if you wanted, and just, using similar to what we did right at the start here, just using that idea of just making those lines a little bit dynamic, but keeping them pretty sharp and angular could be interesting as well. Um, so you could try one something like that. So you notice how I'm making really sharp angular strokes here. I'm not curving the bottom of the A, for example. And you get something that feels a bit more snappy. It feels a bit more modern. Um, Could have done a better job on the P here. But again, with all of these lines, just adding that little dynamic character to all of these ascenders and the descenders here, where not just doing them as straight lines, but doing them just as a little bit of a curve, makes it interesting, I think. And so, just kind of to summarize this idea, you know, try different styles. Think about how you make all of the letters relatively uniform if you're using a style, not necessarily wanting to mix and match things too much. And if you are, like for example, here we've done something very different. You definitely want one word or one style to be the thing that captures the visual interest. And then the other style, I would think, would need to be quite straightforward or simple or clean, so that your focus isn't pulled in a whole bunch of different directions and then it looks disjoint. And then the other thing, as I was saying earlier, was just thinking about how you kind of compose the space. So if you think about the happy birthday, because the word birthday has got so many letters in it, you're thinking about much more rectangular space like that. And then you think about how you compose it. So if you've got your birthday here, you know you, do you write you're happy in the center of the space here? Do you write it right at the start, something like this? The other interesting thing that you might think about, because it's quite unequal in terms of the number of letters, is you might think about the height of the two lines. If you don't want to keep the X height the same, you could write happy much bigger and birthday much smaller, because there's fewer letters in happy. So, your happy might be much larger here. And, you think about your birthday, something like this. So, just not so much about the style, but just in terms of the spacing and composition, the size and so on, you might want to think about things like that. And, it fits quite nicely, everything sits quite aligned. That could be fun. But then, of course, you can break some of those rules as well if you want to, right? Like, you can have certainly, two lines, two lines that are like that. You could have, and then you could see how the B fits over here just before the descenders, because you've got these three descenders, the P, P, and Y. And then this kind of fits nicely. Maybe it's going to be a bit tricky with the Y here, something like that. But you could play around with just messing about with something like that too, potentially. Just looking at the chat, and Molly says, hi, would like to see two lines written continuously if possible. Yeah, we could do that. I was just I was avoiding doing long things because it kind of gets boring to just watch me silently writing. But I can certainly do one, and hopefully, especially for people watching on YouTube, you can skip along 90 seconds. Let's do quick brown fox because I can't think of anything else. Um, I'll draw these lines just so you can see them as well, the grid lines. Not doing the greatest job, but just loosely speaking. All right. So when you're doing like paragraph or whatever, it's nice to just have a standard consistency throughout and not do too many embellishments, particularly on the words within the line. So, I'll play with a little bit of embellishment or a little bit of flourish on the uppercase T for the the. But the rest of it, I'll just try and keep it as straightforward as possible. Sometimes at the last letter on the line or something like that. Maybe it's all right. I hate the word lazy. Yeah. So wrote this slightly under pressure. Maybe I'm looking at the last couple of words here, could have been a bit taller. But yeah, I mean, loosely speaking, that's kind of what it would look like. Um, I do tend to write a lot of I do tend to write a lot. Like I write a lot of letters and notes, and I do my journal and stuff like that. And sometimes I want to write like a whole page, and I want it to look visually interesting at the end. Um, but I don't want to sit and spend the time doing each letter and each character. So sometimes I just do messy, and I think messy can look really nice as well. Um, so what I mean by that is, I mean, this is not calligraphy now. Yeah. This pen is really misbehaving today. I don't know what's going on. Just putting some ink through it. So really, really messy. Um, but and very bouncy. The letters are all over the place, very gestural. I'm writing really quick, as you could see. Um, I kind of, and you can imagine this, like, doing 3 or 4 or 5 sentences like this, across the width of the paper. Let's do that really quick. Let me zoom out so you can see the whole thing. I'm using this pen a bit. And so on and so on. And it kind of, it has its own little interesting charm. And I think what's going on here that's interesting is you can kind of almost see the, the the paciness of the strokes, and just kind of how the letters are being pushed around the page. And I kind of think it has an interesting look to it, and you get a lot of. Yeah, I'm really pushing the nib, as the pen was really complaining. Um, uh, Both because of the speed as well as because of the width of the flex swells. But because of that line variation, and because of the variation in the height of some of these letters, it kind of has a very interesting, very dynamic, very, it feels very alive. So oftentimes, if I'm writing a letter to someone, for example, it's 2 or 3 pages, I just smash through it like this, and it really helps me get my thoughts out really quickly, so I don't end up thinking, concentrating a letter at a time, or a word at a time, and at the end of the sentence, you're like, what is it that I wanted to say again? Um, and it kind of the end product looks quite nice, and also you can go really quick, so you can get through a 2 page or a 3 page letter fairly quickly. Um, yeah. So that's kind of how maybe you do multiple lines, and then um, much more kind of dynamic, more gestural style of writing, which isn't really calligraphy, I don't know, but it has an interesting dynamic look about it. I don't know if there's any other questions, and if there's any, I'm trying to see where that sheet of paper was that I started out originally. If there's anything else that you guys want us to write together, um, where did I put the sheet of paper? If there's anything else that you guys want us to write together, then just put it in the comments. I seem to have lost that. Ah, here we go. So that's some of the stuff Let me zoom out. That's some of the stuff that I did earlier today, just thinking that it could be some interesting sort of starting points for discussion or as inspiration in terms of uh, you know using different styles. We spoke about the dream big a little bit. We spoke about happy birthday. I did happy anniversary here. With the stay curious, did something a little bit different, but just doing both words on one line. I played around with this a lot, just in terms of um, messing about with composition and so on, trying to write this on two lines. And then finally, I thought, just doing the two really exaggerated caps, kind of trying to balance that with an exaggerated descender on the Y looks quite interesting, and quite a not very loose, but a fairly loose style with the lettering. And then the other thing that I thought was quite fun, which I quite enjoyed as well, was doing the inhale, exhale, and doing the exhale in all caps. But again, keeping it quite loose. And you see what's interesting here. Where's my mouse? What's interesting here again is it's not. I mean, it's written on one horizontal line, but there's a lot of interesting stuff happening which makes it kind of dynamic and gives it this kind of curved shape. So you look at the horizontal bit on the bottom of the E. I don't know what that's called. And then the way the A is, and then the way the L comes in here, and you can kind of see this. I find that when both in terms of the verticals as well as in terms of the horizontals, when you have a little bit of a just the hint or the suggestion of a curve in your lines rather than having them straight, it makes the words look much more alive, much more dynamic, much more interesting to look at. And then the other one I did, messy is okay, which is very similar to how I was doing those speedy quick brown foxes. And then in the end, I literally just splattered some ink in there, went in with a paper towel and just kind of dabbed it in and blotted it out and let it get messy, really. Um, And then with the aim high again, similar to what we did with one of the dream bigs earlier, just doing really quite simple, but again, going for that curve rather than a straight line, keeping these letters really simple and, letting um, one or two of the strokes on the word high be a bit exaggerated like this. So it gives you something to look at. There's another question in the chat from Norman. Do you use calligraphy lined paper for practice exercises or as a guide sheet, like tracing paper? I mean, to be very honest, most of the practice that I do is just on regular lined notebooks. Like I use A5 size notebooks, and I just use standard lined paper. It's the ones that I really like. Hold on, I think I have one here I can show you. The ones I use are just these pretty standard Clairefontaine books. They're super inexpensive, and the paper is absolutely fantastic. So I think you get like a 10 pack of these for like 25 pounds or something like that. So I'll just literally, this is just rough, messy nonsense, page after page after page of like absolute chaos. Um, and yeah, I mean, like, it's probably like, every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I'll fill up a book just doing random stuff. So I just gotta see, just writing. I don't know what I was doing here, but just trying different styles, using the lines as a guide. Um, testing a nib, testing a nib. That kind of similar, kind of very loose gestural style that I've been using a lot. I was watching something with my wife on TV, and I was just writing words down from the TV show. I'm going to do my tax, a little list. So yeah, I mean, again, similar style. That's kind of I'm I'm quite into this off late. So doing some maths with the kids. Um, just doing some bits like this. So I'll just sit and practice randomly like that. Um, and then I also use these Say's ruled paper a lot. This is also Clairefontaine. It's exactly the same paper, just a different format and different ruling. I think it's I want to say it's 80 GSM cold pressed. I really like it because it's super smooth. And there's two really nice things about that. Number one, it doesn't absorb ink very quickly, which is a drawback in a notebook. It blots and smudges. But it's really nice because it'll show up like I'm using Diamine Mediterranean blue at the moment. It shows up lovely shading on this paper. It's like super wet, super wet. It doesn't, and sheen, shimmer, all of that stuff really shows up fantastically. It's like it's not going to dry anytime soon. Um, but I really like it a lot. And then I use lightweight paper. This is a Japanese paper called Kokuyo, and I think it's 64 GSM or 68 GSM, something like that. Again, it's super smooth. That similar kind of thing where it takes ages for the ink to dry, but it's absolutely beautiful to use. And both with these size rule paper as well as these, I tend to buy them loose leaf, like just buy a stack of them. And then I'll put them away. Either I'll punch them and put them away, or I'll put them in sleeves if there's something that I've done that's particularly nice. But when you're working like that, then you can just pop the paper on the side, and it can take its time drying. You don't have to worry about pages on a notebook. Yeah. And then from Ed, some general maintenance tips would be welcome. Pretty much any flex nib pen I have, from steel nibs to titanium to gold, piston bulb, cartridge, blah blah. Throws an inexplicable wobbly. Railroads, dead stops being the two biggest problems. Any good tips for these blue moments? Clever wordplay there. I mean, flex nibs are a bit finicky because of the things that you're doing with them. I mean, you saw I was struggling with the nib today as well. I think in general, when you push the nib a lot, and by that I mean two things. Either if you're writing really fast and pushing the nib, so let me just zoom in here. Hold on. Yeah. So I mean, if you're pushing too much, like if I'm, that's really wide. That's probably like 3 mils, 2.5 mils, something like that. And I'm really pushing it, and it is going to railroad at some point. He was quite happily railroading earlier. Now, when I'm asking it to, there we go. It is going to railroad. It is going to struggle. So I think in terms of using FlexNib fountain pens, I'd say go slow and don't really be mean to the nib like what I was doing here or what I was doing with those quick brown foxes. That's it kind of try and keep it within its tolerances. you know, if you're writing cursive, that's a fairly happy speed, and you're getting the line variation quite happily. I mean, there's quite a bit of line variation, and that's okay. Um, I mean, the other thing I will say, and I say this a lot to folks, is the angle at which you hold the nib, and trying to keep it at the 12 o'clock position like this, so the nib is vertical like this and not at an angle like this. I think oftentimes, we're used to writing cursive and we're used to holding our nibs of our fountain pens at an angle sometimes, depending on the style and the way that you write. And the problem with the flex nibs is when you're pressing down on the tines, causing the tines to spread. If you're pressing down on the tines like this, there's equal pressure on both tines and it's okay. But the moment you hold it at an angle like this and you start to press, what's happening is not only are the tines spreading in that plane like this, but they're getting forced because the nib is soft, they're getting forced up and down. And that's when you start to have issues with alignment that cause railroading, that cause hard starts. And over the course of time, that'll just cause your nib to get scratchy and go out of alignment, and various bad things will happen. And the softer and more flex your nib is, the more likely it is to have those issues. So I'd say, if there's one thing that you should try and do, it's try your best to and remember to keep the nib at that 12 o'clock position, especially so when you're now it's railroading quite happily, isn't it? Especially so when you're pulling the flex lines. towards you. Um, and then I guess Ed, the other common sense stuff that you probably know already, and most folks know already, which is keep the pen clean, make sure to give the let me zoom out again here. Make sure to give the cartridge converter a good clean, and if you have some kind of a like a flushing bulb or something like that to flush clean water, just regular tap water is usually fine. Just flush it through the nib and the feed to get keep the feed clean as well. And try and do that if you can every time you fill your pen, or at least every couple of times that you fill your pen. And if you know that you're going to leave a pen inked but unused for months, maybe try not to do that. Um, and yeah, I mean, I know folks like, sometimes chuck, nib units and stuff like that into an ultrasonic clean and so on. And that's usually fantastic, but it's not strictly necessary. You don't have to go out and buy a whole bunch of kit. Um, just something to flush the nib and feed. As I said, you just pull the cartridge converter off and just give the nib and feed a flush through. Even if you don't have any specific flushing bulb or whatever, even if you just kind of hold it under the tap like this and just let the water drip through and wash through. I'm not going to do it because it's mega inky at the moment. Maybe I have a sheet of tissue here somewhere, but um, we've gone off topic, and we're talking about pen maintenance, but it doesn't matter. Um, you can just take with many fountain pens, the nib unit just comes out. It unthreads like this. So I've got the nib unit in my hand here. It's super inky, so s- right, not sure. But sometimes it's nice to be able to just clean out the grip section of the pen. Look, this one is so nice and shiny. Well done, Sunil. But just clean out the grip section of the pen, and clean out the nib and feed itself. Just run it under just run it under a tap. You can, with a lot of pens as well, further disassemble this nib unit. And this is the nib and the feed are just friction fit into this housing here. So you can just grip the nib and feed. I mean, the only thing I'd say is always hold the nib and feed from the top and bottom like this, and not from the sides. Because then you're compressing or pressing the tines together. So if you just hold the nib and feed like this and just pull the converter off, it'll just come off. Um, there's ink everywhere. Um, but essentially, you've now got everything all split apart, and you can just kind of um, just wash all of this again. Just regular tap water, or you just leave it for a couple of hours to soak. If you like, usually something a little bit acidic. I kind of put a few drops of vinegar in the water if it's really stubborn, um, and that's fine. And then you can just put everything back together again. Um, it's pretty straightforward. With a lot of pens, hold on, let me see if I can zoom in here. With a lot of pens, you'll see that the feed is keyed to the housing. So there's a flat bit on the housing here. I'm not sure if you can see it. The light isn't that great, but maybe you can. But there's a flat bit on the housing. You need to find that flat bit and line it up with the flat bit on the feed, because there's only one way it'll go in. Um, and that's everything back in there. And that thing just threads in. Again, I'm just holding the nib and the feed from the top and the bottom here like this. And that just goes in there nice and secure. Converters plugged back in. Just put a bit of ink through. Get everything going again. And you've got a nice, happy, clean pen. And I'm used to getting inky. Yeah, it's part and parcel. There we go. Right. Any other questions? Is there anything else that you want me to write while I'm here? Can I go back to my talking head? Yeah, I mean that's pretty much what I had prepared for the session today. So if you guys want to unmute and ask questions, or if you want to type questions in the chat, happy to take questions. We've got 5 minutes.
Many thanks for that, Sunil. Always lovely seeing you doing your wonderful strokey stuff. Makes me very jealous.
It's a little bit of practice. I mean, I literally just usually it's kind of like a post-dinner thing. I sit down with the wife on the sofa and we're watching an hour or an hour and a half of TV, and usually it's like something super generic. I don't like to, at the end of the day, I don't want anything very cerebral, so just like some very light TV show. And I'll just have my notebook, one of my A5 notebooks and a pen, and I'm just doodling, literally copying words, kind of stream of consciousness style from, whatever's on the TV on that day, or if the wife is saying something. And you kind of just do that every day for an hour or two, and it just gets better automatically. Hmm. Case says on chat, do you have a favorite ink to use when flexing? Um, I'm a big fan of Diamine Mediterranean Blue, which is what I was using today. And I really like it for two reasons. One, particularly on the Clairefontaine, you get wonderful shading, which personally is the thing I like most about inks, more than shimmer and sheen and all of these fancy multi-chroma things and so on. I think just simple shading, where you get some variation in color, and it happens so kind of naturally, so organically, it just looks fantastic. And with this paper particularly, and with a flex nib, a juicy flex nib, you get some fantastic shading with Mediterranean Blue. And also shout out to the guys at Diamine. I mean, they're so amazing. I mean, I go through a lot of this stuff, and bottle to bottle, batch to batch, it's so consistent in terms of, I now know how it behaves in the pen, I know how it behaves on the paper and the color, and it's super consistent. And it's a really nice ink. And it's quite inexpensive, actually. It's incredible value for what it is. So, you can just quite happily go through bottles and bottles of ink, and you don't have to feel like, oh my gosh, this is my precious thing that I have to look after. And I think that's it always stresses me out when you get a limited edition ink, or you get something that is quite expensive, and then you use it grudgingly, and that's not how you're supposed to. You're supposed to mess about with the ink, and it's supposed to just kind of you're just supposed to do silly things with it. So yeah, I am partial to blue, so I do like a few other blues. The Pelican blue is really nice as well. Um, yeah, there's a couple of other really nice ones, and of course, there's all of these misbehaving inks that are so beautiful that you have to forgive them for misbehaving. Like KWZ's Sheen Machine, which is like gunky, and I don't know, it's like full of like it's so super saturated, and there's Sheen Machine coming out of your ears afterwards for weeks afterwards, but it's just so stunning on the paper. You kind of have to forgive it and just use it and enjoy it. So yeah, I mean, there's no end. There's, as you guys know, there's so many lovely inks. Norman says he wants to show us his lovely scrolls. Scrolls? No, he's not sharing. Go on then. Have you guys been writing at all? Like, were you following along? Were you writing along?
I was
I don't know.
observing.
uh, I don't know, Jim, if you're still there. Do you want to just stop recording, maybe, and then we could chat for a couple of minutes before we wrap up? Unless there's any other specific questions that I can answer.
I'd asked if you preferred a wetter ink.
Oh, sorry, I must have missed that one, PJ.
That's
Sorry.
fine. It's fine.
Um, I mean, not necessarily. Uh, I do like wet nibs, obviously, and with flex nibs, they are kind of, especially when you really push them, they are really wet, and it's fun. I was gonna say it's fun watching ink dry, and then I thought that sounds wrong, but actually it is fun watching ink dry, so I'll say it. What are you doing today, Snail? I'm watching ink dry. But I mean, not particularly. I mean, I would say, for example, Mediterranean blue is not, I wouldn't describe it as wet, but I certainly wouldn't describe it as dry either. I mean, it's kind of middle of the road. But some of the drier inks are frustrating sometimes, particularly with flex pens, because they rely so much on the surface tension being held when you flex the tines that sometimes it just gets messed up. I mean, I'm quite cavalier with how I deal with inks, and sometimes people like purists they get shocked when I tell them some of the things that I do. Like I don't care. I'll just dip an ink with a different. I'll dip a nib with a different color ink in a different ink bottle and just fill up the converter that way. Or I'm super happy to mix inks, in the converter with the syringe or whatever. And what's the worst that'll happen? I'll have to wash it out. No big deal. So I do that a lot, and sometimes I get fun results, and sometimes it becomes a bit of a mess. And sometimes I just mess up whole ink bottles, like particularly with lighter color ink. Like, you dip something which had blue in it into a bottle of, I don't know, yellow or something like that. It's all gone. It's all gone to rot. But it's okay, and if it's a very precious ink, then, you want to be a little bit more careful, with some of the special editions or whatever. But I mean, it's fun. I don't think there's any, I don't think there's any rules with it. So sorry, the reason I was saying all of that was with some of the drier inks, one of the things that I do fairly shamelessly is I'll literally just mix in like the smallest drop of dish soap, like just like fairy liquid or whatever, into the converter. So usually what I do is I just mix up, like I put one drop of dish soap in a little bit of water, like maybe 20 or 30 ml of water in a glass or a cup. I give it a nice rinse, and then I'll just pick up with a syringe, with a blunt nose needle syringe, literally one, and just put one drop of that in the converter, and then fill the ink into the converter, and it kind of helps with the surface tension, just to have that little bit of soapiness in there,
Mhm.
and sometimes it works.
Thank you.
There's something that there's a brand in the US called Van Ness, and they do something called White Lightning, which is this um, thing that you mix into ink that makes it wetter. If you want to look into that, but I suspect it's dish soap. I don't know. I don't know. I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say that. It's a it's a unique and well-developed chemical formula.
Made by NASA engineers. I read somewhere. Yeah,
Yes, indeed. Used extensively in the space program.
exactly.
Yeah. So yeah. I mean, it's all fun. Like I think all of this is meant to be fun. Like you have all these sacred rules that you've got to follow, or you can't break. Then what's the fun in that?
On that topic, have you tried Iroshizuku?
Yeah, some of them.
Do you
Some
find
of them.
they might railroad less compared to, say, a normal diamine or something, or is it's just
Say
not?
that again. Say that again, Ed.
So have you found perhaps Iroshizuku might railroad less than, say, like a normal range diamine? Because I mean, diamine varies tremendously on its wetness depending on which one you get.
Yeah.
Um,
I think generally, I think that I certainly haven't tried all the Iroshizukus, but in general, the ones that I've tried, they do feel wet, or kind of medium to wet, and very well behaved. Like you don't have, they wash out easily, they don't cause trouble in the pen and so on. So they're quite nice. I mean, I think in this country we're spoiled by diamine because you buy the Iroshizuku, you get excited because it is Iroshizuku, it's got a pretty bottle or whatever. But at the end of the day, if you think about it's maybe it's a little bit better than some of the standard diamine inks, but is it 8 times better, as in what the cost difference is or whatever? Maybe not. So I think price versus performance. I mean, it's hard, especially if you live in this country and you buy diamine at the UK prices. It's really hard to argue with, and they have such a fantastic range of colors as well. Um, yeah, I mean, I do buy other inks. I'm not a shill for diamine, just to say, 'cause and there's loads of inks that are absolutely fantastic. But I mean, I kind of also, you can just mix and make a bunch of different colors as well. I mean, I do. I use diamine aqua blue, diamine merlot, diamine yellow, and then I don't use black, but a gray, but it could be black as well. And then effectively that's CMYK, and then you can just pretty much make many CMYK colors just by mixing those four inks together. And you can get a whole bunch of absolutely beautiful colors fairly easily. And it's fun to experiment too, it's like a little bit of a science experiment. And you learn a little bit of color theory along the way. And I do that a lot, particularly, I know loads of folks are into kind of matching the ink with their pen and so on. And, this is a great way to do that. It's easy and fun to experiment with. It's a nice thing to sit and do on a Sunday afternoon and muck about a bit. And I found, I think it's Diatramentis, but there's a store in London called Marby and Elm, and they're like a letterpress stationery store, really, not really a fountain pen store. But they do this Diatramentis ink, an OEM that they've labeled up with their own label, which is called Invisible ink. And it is invisible. Basically, it's transparent, and when you heat it up, you get this color. But what's really cool about it is you can use it to lighten out other inks. So, for example, if you want to make, let's say, a really light pastel color, say a light pink or a light purple or whatever, you might start with some aqua blue, some claret, and some of this invisible ink, and mix it all together, and you get like a super light, very pastel, very unique and different shade. So with these four, CMYK and this invisible ink, I mix them and do lots of interesting colors. And I know Nick Stewart, I don't know if you guys know Nick Stewart, has a set, I think, I want to say made by Robert Oster, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not 100% sure. Maybe made by Diamine, of actually CMYK inks that are specifically designed, and they've done a bit of R&D to make sure that they mix well together. And you can buy that set. I think it's again, not very, it's quite inexpensive, maybe 20 quid, 25 quid. And you can buy this set of 4 bottles, and then, you can mix them. It's fine. They're designed for that. Are we still recording, Jim? Maybe we should stop recording because I'm just blabbering. Don't want that on YouTube for all eternity.
You just worried about the dishwasher comment, right? Being out there in the public domain.
Yeah, I know. The guys of Vanessa are very nice, by the way, I should say. They're really, really nice.
I think Jim's away from his computer. He said he's going to be working away on his presentation for tomorrow. So I'm sure they'll cut it after the talk.
I'll send him a note. Please cut before the. No, that's it, man. Hopefully that was interesting and vaguely useful. And that's all I have to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you on the FPNibs email subscription newsletter thing?
No.
Do you know FPNibs in Spain?
Oh yes, I do know them. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not on the I'm not signed up to the newsletter.
It's the newsletter came just before your talk started, and it's a really interesting cutout on a nib to make it semi-flex on the BOK number 6 steel nibs. If you imagine that's the tip of the nib, sort of on either side of the tine, there's like on either side of the slit, there's like a triangular cutout, just 2 lines. And I've never seen that before. From a sort of engineering point of view, I'd have a look at it because you may have come across it before. I'd never seen that, because you see some modifications are pretty standard on trying to get nibs to behave more fluidly, but this was really it looked funky, but it was also really interesting that okay, that'll make that movement more.
It's very interesting. I mean, one thing, of course, is about, as you put pressure down, getting the tines to splay this way. But obviously, as you're putting pressure down on the nib, what's happening is the nib is moving this way as well, like in that vertical plane as well. So there's movement in 2 planes. There's the tines spreading, which is the kind of desirable thing that you want. You want to have that flex. but then you have the tines moving vertically because you're pressing them down like this. So you're encouraging them to, to pivot upwards, and then they lose. It breaks contact between the undersurface of the nib and the top surface of the feed, which is where the ink channel is that's supplying ink to this nib. And that's sometimes, to your point about railroading that you made earlier and so on. That's sometimes one of the problems as well. It's not about, oh, the tines spread too wide. It's about, oh, it deflected too much in that vertical plane.
Yeah.
So it's about thinking like some of the designs in terms of, the cutouts and so on with the nibs are also about thinking, how that movement, when you put force on the tines and you put pressure on the tines, how that movement is going to take place across both those planes. And it's quite interesting. And but also sometimes, you kind of want that vertical movement. That vertical deflection makes the nib feel soft and almost brush like. You can feel it moving under your hand like that. And I like that a lot. It feels really nice to write with. um, but it's about finding just that the right balance of those two or three things. And I think that's what makes FlexNib super interesting, both to use as well as to design or make or whatever, because there's so many different variables, right? It's about, keeping that ink flow, keeping the feel, making sure it's soft, making sure it snaps back quickly, so you go back to, your fine upstrokes and whatever. Um, and how that softness of the nib, the vertical deflection, how that kind of feels when you write with it. And there's a whole bunch of different variables. It's exciting.